So on this one, we're going to talk all about flow in the tank, how you can implement it, and what the benefits are for your peacocks and haps. Now, I think flow with freshwater aquariums is quite an overlooked topic, but there could be loads of benefits to having flow in your tank, not just for the tank itself, but also for your fish. So it's what I want to discuss with African cichlids, because obviously I feel like it can be very beneficial, especially for your peacocks and your haps, with them being open water swimmers. So I'll show you a few of the things I've got on the tank which implement flow into it. There's different types of flow, different things that you can buy to give you different sort of effects in the tank. But there's a lot of benefits to it, so we'll run through them here today, and then there's a lot of benefits for the fish as well. So first we'll touch on the fish. With these fish, they're open water swimmers, so peacocks and haps, they swim in big open water spaces. They're from a massive lake in Africa called Lake Malawi. So obviously that's a body of water that big, it has its own sort of tides, it has currents. So I think it's important that we implement a bit of flow into the tank instead of sort of recreating more or less like a pond where it's just nothing's moving inside. Obviously if they've got a bit of water flow, the fish, what I've noticed, they like to swim against it. So if they're swimming against the current, then it obviously gives them a bit of exercise. It helps keep the fish strong, because it's like a bit of a treadmill for the fish. So it helps keep the fish strong. It also is good for curbing aggression. So when the fish are chasing after each other, and they're really sort of going at it, a little bit of flow here and there can sort of hit the fish, and then it can sort of take it off track from what it's doing, and it's a little bit of a distraction. So it's a really good tool with curbing your aggression with the fish. I have a Maxspect Gyre on it, which I'll show you in a bit more detail after. But what's really good about that is what you'll find with a lot of wave makers. Excuse me, if you get yourself a good one, then you can actually control different features on it. So the Maxspect Gyre is designed for reef tanks, so saltwater aquariums. So you can get different modes on it. What I use is like a reef pulse mode. So what it will do is throughout the day, it will deliver different rates of flow. So for a couple of hours of the day, could be a low flow, gives the fish a bit of a rest. And then for another hour of the day, it'll be really high, and it'll be really powering some flow into the tank, and the fish will be sort of swimming against it and stuff. So it gives them a bit of variety. They're not getting blasted about the tank all day. So they'll have periods of low flow, they'll have periods of high flow. And it's just really beneficial for the fish. I think it's really overlooked because I think your wave makers and stuff are really, they're marketed more towards your saltwater tanks and your marine tanks, because you do need a lot of flow in there. But you can introduce them into freshwater tanks, especially with cichlids and stuff, where you've not got plants and things that are blowing around everywhere. I did actually use that on my planted tank as well, and it worked really well at keeping the tank clean. So we'll move on to that after. But yeah, definitely, if you've got African cichlids, peacocks and haps especially, I would definitely suggest getting yourself some sort of power head, some sort of wave maker that's going to introduce a bit of flow into the tank. Another thing flow is really good for is keeping your tank clean. So what it will do is it will constantly turn over the water in your display. So if you've got sort of waste food in there that's sort of sank down to your substrate, it's gone behind your rocks, Introducing wave makers, power heads, flow into the tank, it eliminates dead spots in your tank. And what it will help do is take all this waste, fish poo, food, it'll bring it up into the water column, and then it will make it easier for, if you've got a canister filter, your filter intakes will make it easier for them to pick up the waste and take it down into your filtration and dispose of it and break it down. Or if you've got an overflow, it gets up in the water column and allows it to go over to your overflow and back down into the sump. So with power heads, like I was saying before, there's a few different types that you can get which have different types of flow rate, which work a little bit differently inside the tank. What I use is the Maxspect Gyre. So I'll show you what that is. Well, what it looks like anyway. Fits on with a magnet at the back. It's not too intrusive, so it sits at the top, so it's not really sticking out in the tank and making it look ugly. But I'll show you an example of what it does, because it sits at the top there and then it pumps the water along the top of the surface. So I'll give you an example of how it works. So the flow rate, it starts here. And what the Maxspect Gyre does, it creates something called laminar flow. So it creates a blanket of flow along the surface of the water, which comes right along the top, essentially like a wave. So it'll come right along the top. It hits the far end of your tank. The flow will travel down the bottom. And then because this is pumping constantly, it'll travel down the bottom and then it'll start dragging. The flow will come along the bottom, and as it comes along the bottom, it drags all the detritus up off the bottom of your substrate, brings it back up into the pump and then pumps it along the surface. So what it's doing is essentially it's cleaning my tank for me all day. So the flow comes round, it scoops it all up, pumps it back up and straight along the surface, and when that detritus is near the surface, it gets to my overflow, flows over, down into the filter, and then it's dealt with. So another really big benefit to having flow. What I should have is, now I can see sort of the escape and everything, how the flow works. I think I should get another one down here on this side, which just gives it a little bit of a boost, because it's such a long tank. I don't think it's dragging it all the way, because I'm getting a little bit of sort of build up of detritus in this bit here. So I think it does the majority of the job, and then I think it runs out of steam a bit here. But I'll get another power head here, and what that'll do is it'll help force it along a little bit. And then we have them on intermittently throughout the day, obviously, so that the fish aren't basically in a big washing machine and getting blasted about the tank. But these laminar flow wave makers, I think, are your best ones to put in these tanks, just because of the effect they have and how they sort of turn it around, and it creates that laminar effect and cleans your tank for you. And also, what you can get is, I don't know if I've got any in here. I did have one lying around somewhere. One sec. I might have one in here. So I've got it. So this is made by Cichlids, and it's actually a it's an AC one, so it's quite an old one. It hasn't got any settings where you can customize the flow or anything, but these ones work a little bit differently. So you can control the flow. It's got a little nozzle on the front, and what that would do is sit on the side of your tank like this, and then the flow this would give out would be completely different to this one. So this would essentially fire just a jet stream of flow. So it'd just be like a long tube, and then depending on how you have your setting on the front of it, you can make it more or less powerful, but it's more of a conical, straightforward blast of flow, which is why I've not put it in this tank, because I think this one it is dirty for a start, but I think it would be too much direct flow. It'd be too powerful. This spreads it out as like a blanket along the surface, But this one is essentially, it's like a machine gun of flow. So it'll just blast everything everywhere. So that's why I've not put it in this one. It's a little bit too powerful. Like I said, you can't change any of the settings on it. So it's a plug and play. You plug it in, you get what you're given, and then you can use this, but I just don't think it's ideal for the African cichlid tank. So another thing flow is really good for, which is also massively beneficial, comes on the surface of the water. So you can see there's a lot of movement on the top, which we call surface agitation. So when you've got a bit of flow in the tank, I mean, you get a bit from your return pumps, but with some canister fillers, that return hose isn't very powerful if you've got a big tank. So if you've got a wave maker in there, ideally with all sort of wave makers, power heads, you want to point them up towards the surface, because it's going to put the detritus up into the water column for a start, but it's going to agitate the surface. So when you're agitating the surface, it makes really good gas exchange go on with your water. So it helps oxygen get into the water. It helps the bad gases come out of the water. So that's another thing, when you've got a lot of movement on the surface, it's great for gas exchange. So that's the issue I had when I had a planted tank. So because there was so much movement on the top, and because I've got the sump at the bottom, when I have got the moving bed filter on it, that creates a lot of surface agitation. There's water dropping down the overflow. Planted tanks are much better with a canister filter, because the issue I was having was the CO2 that I was injecting into the tank. Because there was so much surface agitation in the sump and so much on the top of the tank, I was losing a lot of CO2 from the water. And so all my carpeting plants and everything were really struggling, but there was nothing I could do about it because I had to have the sump. It was the only filtration I had. I could have gone and got a canister filter, but I really didn't want to because I'd spent so long plumbing this tank and everything. So the tank didn't fail. I still grew a lot of plants in it. It looked really good, but it was an issue. I was injecting a lot more CO2 than I needed to in that tank because of the surface agitation. But in a tank like this, which is fish only, it's only going to be beneficial to your fish. It's going to get good oxygen exchange into the water, and then obviously that's going to be very, very beneficial and good for the health of your fish. So if you want to go out and get yourself a power head, you can, depending on the size power head you get, you can end up spending a little bit of money on them. If you can, try and get a decent one, because this one I've had on air, it cost me about 150 quid, 150 to 200 quid, which is expensive, but this has been running in my tank for no issues for 18 months plus. Whereas I've had the cheaper ones, which you can find on eBay, I won't name them, but I've had them before and they failed after a couple of months. So you're better getting a little bit more of an expensive one. They come with some of them come with features where you can control them via an app. This one is actually got a controller which I'll show you, which you keep in the sun. So as you can see here, well, you might not be able to see, it's a bit bright, but there's loads of different sort of flow patterns on here, which you can see here. So it's like a constant, a pulsing, reverse, so it actually pumps in reverse as well, so it can reverse the flow and take it down the other way. And then you can sort of control your power settings on it. I have got it about 80% at the moment on the maximum. And then you just set it and forget it. And then if you want to change anything, obviously you have to come back down into your sump and make some modifications to it. But as soon as you set them up, they're pretty much more or less, you just leave them and then they do the job and do their own thing. So flow in a peacock and hat tank, just to summarize it all, I would say yes. It's not a must have, But definitely, I think if you've got a bigger tank, which the majority of us are going to have, if we've got peacocks and haps, we're going to have bigger tanks, then flow's definitely a good idea. It's definitely beneficial to the fish. And it's also beneficial to your tank and keeping it clean as well. So, if you haven't got a wave maker, have a look at some. You can get them in different sizes. They come in different prices, but try it out. And then you should notice some differences in your tank as well.